Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Last week, we aired an old interview. I had planned an interview with a guest who had to cancel at the last minute. The week prior to that, I interviewed James Jimenez, the CEO of Voices for Children, one of our favorite ally organizations. And we spoke about the state budget and the critical need to diversify our revenue base as we are so dependent on gas and oil revenues. We also discussed some of the changes in the New Mexico state legislature, especially as relates to tax and revenue bills. It was an eye-opening show. The week prior, I spoke with two activists and friends from Earth Care and Yucca, Seneca Johnson and Miguel Acosta. It was a most informative discussion with info on the $500,000 that Yucca distributed through its mutual aid network throughout COVID. And we talked about many of the other things in which Yucca is involved with. That's a great organization, youth-led organization. So it's worth checking that out. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Paul White, Aaron Richard, and William Henry Yee, board members from the Santa Fe Basin Water Association. And they have raised concerns about out-of-control housing development in Santa Fe, citing water and livability issues as the major concerns. Before we get started with our guests, though, I have a few short announcements. I want to first acknowledge that we're conducting this interview on stolen Tewa land, and to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. And then secondly, no doubt all of you have heard the news on the proposed Avangrid PNM merger. The impulse is to sit back and reflect upon how we won a miraculous victory. But while the chief hearing examiner did lay out 450 pages of reasons to deny the merger, the PRC process leaves open the possibility that commissioners could go and cobble together a deal they felt was in the interest of the state and overrule the hearing examiner. Doesn't happen very often, but it could definitely happen. And there's going to be a good deal of pressure from the governor and her allies on PRC commissioners to come up with a deal. So Retake Our Democracy. The vote, by the way, will be the first 2 weeks of December. And so Retake Our Democracy just published an action guide. It's posted on our homepage. All you do is go to the homepage and look in the menu bar and you'll see Avangrid and click on it. And it lays out speaking points, provides contact information, and describes our communication strategy and our plan for trying to overcome the misinformation ads and the lobbying that PNM, Avangrid, and Iberdrola will be doing. We think this is going to be one of the most important decisions the PRC has ever made. I also want to remind you that the 2022 legislative session is now under 2 months away. Don't say 2 weeks, you're scaring me. 2 months away, and Retake will be operating our legislative alert system again this year. And as in the past, if you're signed up for our alerts, anytime one of our bills comes before a committee or goes to the floor of the Senate or the House, you will get an alert email that includes contact information for your legislator, and with speaking points on that bill. And then, of course, encouragement that you contact your legislator. This year, in part due to my stroke, we are limited, which limits my capacity and also limits Roxanne's time because she's involved in my recovery. We're going to limit the number of bills we support to far fewer than the 45 we supported last year. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin. You can sign up for alerts by going to our homepage at retakeourdemocracy.org and look for the red sign up button on the right side of the homepage. If you're interested in actually just learning more about how the legislature works and how you can raise your voice more effectively, you should participate in our weekly legislative huddles that will begin on December 9th from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. In the past, our Zoom strategy huddles were held every Friday from 3:30 to 4:30, so we could recoup the past week. But that cuts out a lot of people who work. So during our December 9th huddle, we're going to try and figure out another time for that. These sessions are really important opportunities for you to learn how the legislature really unfolds, where the levers of power are and how we can advocate effectively in this environment. You can sign up for these sessions at our homepage. Click on New Mexico legislation in the menu bar, and a sign up link can be found at the top of the page. We will be sending out Zoom invites in our blog next week, but you can get it in your calendars now, December 9th from 6 to 7. And the governor has announced her net zero plan to be introduced as a bill in the 2022 legislative session. And while Sierra Club and other corporate enviros sang entirely uncritical praise, RETAG took some time to explore what net zero is, and we're so taken aback at how misleading and flat out bad it is, and how many indigenous and global South communities are opposed to net zero. We quickly developed 2 posts last weekend, and they received tons of support and comment. If you want to read more about what net zero is, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and look for the 2 most recent posts, SoulNet Dares to Hope and Counting the Dots, COP26, Net Zero, and the ETA. I promise you won't be sorry. If you're driving around and miss any of this show, you can watch the full show and any of our past shows by going to our website and going to Actions and Events and click on that, and then scroll down to the link, and it's right at the top, Retake Conversations, and all our shows reside there in chronological order. That's more than enough announcements, and so let's get to our guests. Welcome, Aaron, Paul, and William.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So can each of you take a moment to tell us who you are and how you got involved in advocacy related to water and housing? Let's start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, my name's Aaron Richard, and I'm a visual artist here in Santa Fe. I live in the Chupadero area. And I joined this group basically out of concern about the overdevelopment and the water issues that are related around those issues.
Okay. How about you, Aaron? Oh, I'm sorry, that was Aaron. How about you, William?
Yes, I'm William Mee with the Agua Fria Village Association, Acequia Agua Fria, and also the Agua Fria Well Owners Association. And, you know, in 1979, we had a big water meeting to support our adjudication efforts. And so I've been involved in water ever since.
Okay. And what about you, Paul?
I started getting involved in water issues when I lived out in Chupadero, and the AMA water settlement was being discussed in federal court, and I helped to form an organization called the Powahki Basin Water Alliance, and we got involved in the settlement. And then realizing the issues around water, I became involved in the Santa Fe Basin Water Association when the old board was going to dissolve the network, the organization. And so I felt like we needed to step up to the plate and take that organization over. Also got involved with the founding member of the United Communities of Santa Fe County, which was addressing the Santa Fe County Growth Management Plan. And William will go a little into that soon.
Okay. So can you let our listeners know just a little bit more about the Santa Fe Basin Water Association and what it does? And I saw on your website that you work with United Communities of Santa Fe. So maybe you could talk about that relationship and how you collaborate. William?
Yes, the Basin Water Association started basically in 1974, and it came out of the 1971 water adjudication. And it just brought together a number of mutual domestics, acequia associations, neighborhood associations, to help fund that adjudication and to help preserve and protect their water rights. United Communities, we started in 2009 to help the Santa Fe County do a growth management plan and also a sustainable land development code that they were working on. And we completed those in 2013. We amended them in 2015. And, basically we've been kind of on hiatus since then.
Looks like you're back off
this is-
hiatus.
yeah,
Okay. So in your piece, Aaron, you describe, oh, I'm sorry. Aaron, you recently published a response to an op-ed from Friends of Architecture. Can you outline the Friends of Architecture's position and what is the gist of your concerns with that position, Aaron?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I want to say, we're hoping to have a productive dialogue with Friends of Architecture, and I think that's underway. But they're proposing to increase the housing supply in Santa Fe expeditiously, and they want to do that by streamlining and scaling back some of the approval processes. Things like changing zoning ordinances, building codes, reducing height and lot setback requirements. But we agree with their desire for affordable housing, but also that zoning ordinances are there for a reason. But our main concern is, where will the water come from? Independent water experts, they have stark projections for the water resources here in this area. And it's really unclear at this point what the solutions are for supplying water for all that development. And also, what impact on the overall livability to the city. Things like traffic, congestion, density, smog, loss of open space, which contributes to the heating up of a city. So our concerns in a nutshell are water, sustainability, impact, all related to overdevelopment.
Okay. In your piece, you describe how water calculations are done by the city, and that includes the use of water credits to justify continued building. What are water credits, and why are those calculations unsustainable or invalid, or if not invalid, at least inaccurate and optimistic? William?
The the whole water issue is very complex, and these water credits are a developer buys lower Rio Grande water rights and then transfers them up to the city of Santa Fe. And it's, in a sense, it's kind of maybe immoral, unethical to stop farming down in the middle of Rio Grande, like in Los Lunas and Belen, and then somehow move this water up to Santa Fe for water rights. But also, those are paper water rights. Those are a legal mechanism to move water rights, but we're not actually moving wet water, real water. That is very limited, and the sources that we have in the city of Santa Fe are very precarious. I mean, they could, you get the effects of climate change, and that water won't be available. And, the city recently in April 2021 did a presentation, What's Up with Water? And they talked about unveiling their portfolio of 22,200 acre feet annually, 7.23 billion gallons of water. And then they said, well, we only use 8,800 acre feet annually because, our 85,000 people are doing some extreme conservation. So they're saying, well, gosh, we almost have 3 times as much water as we need. But when you really look at the wet water, they have a hard time delivering 10,000 acre feet a year. And we know that each year of climate change, that will be a dwindling resource. And, water systems are rated on their diversity. And heck, the city of Santa Fe has 4 water sources. But when you look at the Buckman wells the 13 of them. Those are pumping down kind of quickly. When you look at the 7 city wells under the city limits, those have some pollution plumes that are moving towards them. So will those be safe to use? The reservoir, that's at 31% of normal. So, that's always in question. And this whole idea of San Juan Chama water coming out of the Colorado River, I mean, is that realistic? Because, in April of 2021, we saw Farmington have water restrictions, and they're right on top of the river.
Okay, so your op-ed struck a chord with me because I've been writing a lot about how when we're discussing climate change, policymakers always center continued growth and green growth as an assumption, just like here with housing growth. It seems that growth trumps any and all other concerns. Is that what is at play here with housing, where the debate centers around the perspective of housing developers and architects who very obviously have vested interest in continued building? How can we inject a bit of water reality into the discussion? Aaron?
Yes, well, water reality is that we are in an era of limitations, and this is due to a drier climate. That is the water reality. And yes, developers have a financial interest, but they also have unfettered access to the city leaders. They have influence, they have money. On the other side of that, communities and residents don't have that equal access, and often their voices are muted. I mean, the Candlelight Neighborhood Association lawsuit against the city council speaks right to the heart of that matter. But look, the city has this hair on fire mindset of more and more growth at all costs, and they acquiesce to developer demands. But the reality really is that our water resources and its sustainability has to be fully adjudicated at this point. And it has to be done independently. We have to do that before we can sanction any more development.
So I've been part of discussions around the Midtown project and other affordable housing plans. There always seems to be the assumption that to make affordable housing financially feasible, there must be 500 units of market rate housing to be able to squeeze in 50 affordable units. Is that an accurate assumption, or is there a way around that?
Well, it's an extremely short-sighted plan, in my opinion. I mean, look, developers are not here to build affordable housing. I mean, let's look at the Zia Station project as an example. They're going to build 384 units. Only 39 of those are going to be affordable, but here's the catch. They're only going to be affordable for 10 years. And then they go back to market rate, and then we're back in the same cycle of gaining some and then losing them again. And the whole fee in lieu of concept, which is where developers are able to buy their way out of doing the affordable units, it's been called a win-win, but really, in my opinion, it's just leading to overdevelopment. And this is what I call blind development, which is development that does not fully address its sustainability. I mean, affordable housing, we have to realize affordable housing needs to be separated out from the market rate equation. The city has to take it on, they have to own it, they have to start being really creative about building lasting affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. I need to take a quick break here to remind our listeners that this is KSFR, and it's at times like this that KSFR is more important than ever, offering timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you sane in these challenging times. With so much misinformation out there, it's important to have a source of information that's reliable. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and think of it as your ticket for admission to a wealth of programming. Just go to ksfr.org and click on the donate button. Let's get back to our discussion. It sometimes seems to me that the city is more interested in housing projects that provide more market housing, likely because more buildings of damn near anything will create more jobs and more revenue for the city. Is this how you see it? Does the city have to begin to understand that for sustainability and livability reasons, we simply can't afford a city to continue to grow and grow and grow? That would be Paul.
We became interested in what the city is doing in these regards. When I saw that there was going to be a growth management plan coming up in 2022, and as we had worked on the county's growth management plan, this seemed like something that we should get involved in our organizations. And we feel that that there needs to be more discussion about growth, and there seems to be very little venues for people in the community to actually engage in discussions about growth. So the city's upcoming growth management plan should include voices from the diverse communities in Santa Fe, as well as the county. We should be having these discussions with the city, and we decided that this is the time for us to bring communities together from the city, bring individuals that have concerns, and include them in these discussions with the city, rather than the city just going off on their own with the growth management plan. So that's what we've been working on.
That's sort of what happened with the Midtown project, frankly. And so it would be good to see a group like yours forcing a more open door process that invites different kinds of perspectives. I want to stay on the livability issue for a bit. My wife and I just spent 2 weeks in California, and we're repeatedly found ourselves plugging into our GPS destinations that were 3 to 4 miles and 20 minutes away. Cerrillos can be like that too. Is that our future in Santa Fe if this thirst for growth continues?
Well, let me just say, I think we're going to throw this over to Paul. But, I used to live in LA. And, sometimes I wonder if people who are promoting all this idea of unbridled growth have actually ever lived in a big city, because if they have, I don't think they would be all that interested in, the things that choke up a city, what things I talked about before of congestion and traffic and those kinds of things. But I'll throw it over to Paul for the rest.
Well, I came across a book called Prosperity Without Growth. And the principle is that there needs to be some kind of discussion about the issue of prosperity versus growth, and how we can address this growth problem. And frankly, this is what we want to interject into the growth management plan discussions, is the limits that we face, and how do we have prosperity without just continued development. And there are solutions that can be discussed. Other cities around the country, around the world, all grapple with this. And there are examples of how this can be addressed, but we need to have a dialogue first, instead of just unbridled growth and an approval of development that is sustainable. Where is the dialogue? We're not getting that.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. There's no question but that we must create more affordable housing. I've seen estimates of up to 5,000 units needed, and that we have a diminishing water supply at the same time. So you are now in charge. What would you propose we do that could lead to more affordable housing without leaving us vulnerable to the tap running dry, William?
I served on the City County Affordable Housing Task Force in 1985, 36 years ago. And we are no further along now than we were then. So I think it's pretty clear. We elected a strong mayor, and their main job was to build affordable housing for the tourism industry workers who had basically relocated to Rio Rancho. And they were putting all of their spending down in Rio Rancho. And sometimes they just drop off riding the train, and they just get jobs in Albuquerque because maybe the childcare was the deal breaker for them. So the thing is, when we last looked at the living wage, I think it was $11.16 an hour, and employers were working those tourism industry workers about 32 hours a week. So they didn't have to pay any fringe benefits. And so when you do a monthly budget for those people, they only have about $500 a month to spend on housing. But when you do the math, that is about $50 a square foot. And what we're finding is that the builders are building at 250 to 350 a square foot. So, you know, it's like a real catch-22. We'll never be able to build affordable housing without some type of government subsidy being put into the equation. And, you know, maybe what we can do is build more shells instead of having all of the amenities like electronics and that type of thing in a house. But, you know, affordable housing has been the guise that all of this development has happened. But less than 2% of those 6,000 units that have been built or remodeled or permitted are really affordable. And then of those 2%, some of those meet a $280,000 level. And that's not affordable to that guy that only has $500 in his budget to put down on housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is there's a failure of commitment on the part of the city to subsidize sufficiently in order to be able to build truly affordable housing. We
Yeah,
only have a couple of minutes
totally
left.
true.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's totally true. And I think what's happening is the cities keeps pushing it off on developers to come up with a plan. And that's what you're seeing right now.
Well, is it possible that the city could just donate some land to a 501c3 who pledges to create a community land trust and then build only affordable housing on it that's subsidized by the city? Would that be a viable plan? I'm seeing nods of the head. Paul, you got a comment?
I think that is a viable plan. There's a nonprofit called Habitat for Humanity, which builds affordable housing, but they're limited to only a few a year. It's an excellent idea. What about the city donating appropriate land that would fit the needs? And what if the city were actively involved in these projects, such as I had an idea about the city making adobes, for example. And so a large cost of building is in the construction materials. Adobes more or less are free. It's just using dirt from the land and maybe getting machines or doing it the old way where you'd have a tractor or a backhoe fill out forms with the adobes in them. And that could be something that the city could provide. Also, I just want to bring up that the city doesn't have any contingency planning. We've been advocating for contingency planning where when certain benchmarks are met, such as declining aquifers, water not being available from the Rio Grande River due to low flows or fires, or the Rio Grande Compact allocating more water for Texas, for example, that there be contingency planning. And at that point that certain, what would you say, grants come into effect where housing and applications for housing are curtailed based on simply on the availability of water. we'd like to see that kind of written in. And the growth management plan is an excellent opportunity to have something like that written in. Some of the things that could come into effect are
I'm sorry, William, we're way over time on this now. I'd
Okay.
like to give Aaron a second to tell us how listeners can find out more about your work.
Yeah, simply go to unitedsantafe.org. You can sign up there for newsletters, emails, stuff like that. You can also donate. We've got some blogs, posts on there. It's quite a bit of information at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. We're going to take a brief pause, and then we're going to continue the discussion for the YouTube recording. Okay, we're back by podcast, and the radio show is over. And so we can get a little bit more informal and ad hoc. And so I'm wondering, you were just talking about this, William, in terms of using the management plan, the growth management plan, to actually manage growth and consider alternatives that might be possible. Did any of you others, Aaron or Paul, have anything to add to that?
Go ahead, Paul.
Or let me continue a little bit. I guess we started building a lot of apartments because in the Trump tax plan, excuse me, there's a provision that allows for the investments to be written off much easier. And you can actually write off up to 100% of your investment in an apartment complex. And I guess this was to appease some of Jared Kushner's friends and even his thing. But so we're seeing a lot of apartments built here. But then the problem is that a lot of these, or almost all of these, are being managed by out-of-state corporations, and then they're actually being sold and transferred to out-of-state people. So it's not doing anything for local residents. Another thing is we just have on Thursday, the 18th at 6 o'clock, the Planning Commission is going to hear 75-foot tall building ordinance. And that is a kind of a boondoggle for Santa Fe also. I mean, sure, give Innovation Park developer, let him build his 75-foot tall building, but don't put that onto the rest of the city because, once you go over 3 stories, you need elevators. And there are no designers, no builders that can build buildings in Santa Fe that are with elevators and that need steel superstructure. There are a couple of firms in Albuquerque, but most likely we're going to have out-of-state entities come in and make these buildings. So then what is the purpose of paying people out of state when the jobs are needed here in Santa Fe? And then the cost of steel, concrete, and wood is up about 300%. So this isn't sustainable. And once you build those 75-foot buildings, you can't go back and say, well, let's knock them down and build affordable housing in their place. They'll be totally off the market to help our affordable housing crisis. The other thing is that, say we wanted to put solar arrays on top of these buildings. Well, we couldn't put enough solar to power a 75-foot building. I mean, we're better off 3 stories and below, and then our solar would keep up with our need for each one of those buildings.
So I'm wondering how all this plays into gentrification. That's one of our major issues. And it seems like you're never going to prevent gentrification if you continue to build market rate housing, because the market is driven by the cost of living, which is going up all the time, and wages aren't going up all the time. So comments on that?
Well, I have another comment. So property taxes by the county assessor are done by the highest and best use of a property. So if you build a 75-foot tall building or a 3-story building, your neighbors immediately fall into the category of their higher and best use is building a 75-foot tall building or a 3-story building. And so they can no longer afford the property taxes on their own property, and they have to sell, and then it opens that up for more dense development. So it just kind of snowballs. And we saw this on Canyon Road. I mean, Canyon Road used to be an area of farms, total farms. And I think the only thing that's not a gallery or a bed and breakfast on Canyon Road now is the Rios Wood Yard, and I guess the parking lot. But we're changing the city different into Everytown USA, and pretty soon people aren't going to want to come to Santa Fe because there is no more charm or spirituality or the things that people saw in Santa Fe and moved here. They'll be gone. It'll just be Santa Fe, New Jersey.
I
I
said to my
agree with
wife
that.
that it was like turning Santa Fe into San Jose. So I guess the next thing I was going to ask is, isn't it also the policies related to second homes that drives the cost of housing? And what could we do about that?
And I don't think we have a second home problem. We have a third, fourth, and fifth home problem. It's actually part of a portfolio of Wall Street stockbrokers that you have a home in Santa Fe. You get a ranchette in Montana, you get a home in LA, a home in New York, and maybe a home in Houston. And the home in Santa Fe is part of it. And I've done door to door for the Democratic Party, and you go through La Tierra and Las Campanas, and most of those homes are vacant. They are just multiple. So I think the only way you can address that is through taxation. And the other thing that's facing us is short-term rentals. Everyone's changing their former rental that they were renting to the restaurant and hotel workers for, maybe it's 3 couples, they pay $500 each. So they pay the landlord $1,500. Well, if he evicts them and he remodels, he can all of a sudden get $3,000 a month as an Airbnb. So all of those quaint adobes on the east side have gone to Airbnb. And so there's no housing for our tourism industry workers.
So I'm guessing that what all three of you would agree on is that the thing that Santa Feans and our listeners need to do is to plug into this growth management plan. When is that supposed to begin, and how would people get information about that process?
We have been talking with Jesse Roach. I'm sorry, Jason Kluk at the city about when this is going to be rolled out. We're supposed to meet with him early December, get more information about how it's going to be implemented. And we've already started setting up coalition members, people who want to be part of our initiative to have a broader, a unified, maybe not a necessarily unified voice, but more involvement from the communities and in this process, which is what we did with the county. However, with the county, we had a more sympathetic feedback from the county, their planning department, some of the people who were in the county at that time were much more interested in getting the communities involved, and they were glad that we set up our organization and our coalition, and that we reached out to communities across the county. One of our concerns right now, Paul, is that the city is not very enthusiastic about people getting involved. And we have to have a large enough community involvement, enough coalition members to get their attention and to, if necessary, force our way in to have a dialogue. We don't feel that the city is very amenable to that at this point.
Well, sometimes you have to kind of storm the walls. So we will track that at Retake and encourage our listeners and our members to get involved in this process, because this is important. We haven't been doing as much local advocacy as we had in the beginning of our organization. We've been focused on statewide stuff. But I want to thank
Can I
all
just
of you
add-
for being with us today. And did
Can
you
I
have
add one
something you
thing?
wanted to add, Aaron?
Yeah, I just want to say that, to that point, there's an awful lot of people here in Santa Fe that share the same view. I mean, since we started a new website and the articles have come out, things like that, we've gotten a lot of emails saying, yeah, I fully agree that these are important issues, that community voices need to be heard and respected and taken into consideration. We need a seat at the table. That's a big issue. And yeah, it's and the other thing too is protect the traditional communities and values of Santa Fe without
Do you work with Chainbreaker at all?
No.
Oh, you should check out Chainbreaker, because they've done an excellent report on the gentrification of the city over the last 15, 20 years. And they have some great maps that show how at one point Canyon Road area had like a huge proportion of longtime residents, low working class people, and they've all been moved to the south and west side. So they're very active in advocacy around housing. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all three of you for being with us today. And we'll get this show over to KSFR and it'll air on Saturday morning.
And thank you, Paul. And I hope you're feeling better. We're looking forward to more conversations with you.
Okay. Thank you very much, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.